Last year, I made a video on Darling in the Franxx in which I defended the excessive melodrama in the series and why melodrama is not an inherently bad style of writing. It's a shame that melodrama is often conflated with being bad, even when some of the most beloved stories incorporate significant melodramatic elements, and I highly recommend that video if you hold such a predisposition. So I find it rather odd that I, of all people, am having difficulties watching O Maidens of the Savage Season. Not in a I just can't get hooked on it kind of way. In fact, I'd say it's quite the opposite, with almost every facet being of high quality. Mari Okada is the premier melodrama writer for anime and has written some of my favorite shows. And Masahiro Ando is a fantastic director with plenty of strong works under his belt. It's not the quality that's catching me up. It's more so a matter of, I find it emotionally difficult to deal with. As previously stated, I'm certainly no stranger to Okada's past works, so why is it that this is the one to trip me up? The short answer is pretty obvious even without digging too deep, and we'll get to that in a bit, but it's also a little more complicated than just a single answer. Plenty of anime cover topics that might be considered a bit heavy in nature, but they're often tackled in a more roundabout way. Take Franxx, for example. The symbolism regarding desire and abuse is incredibly blatant, but it's still symbolism, so it has that layer of separation to make those elements feel more fantastical even when they're being shoved in your face. This allegorical nature makes these topics easier to digest, especially for a younger audience that's being exposed to these ideas for the first time. It doesn't necessarily make it better, but simply more digestible. This can also be true of melodramas with more realistic settings, such is the case with my personal favorite anime, Your Lie in April. The story is very obvious about its themes of trauma, abuse, death, and forming connections with other people. However, the visual elements of this series take a more abstract approach with how these ideas are represented. The narrative symbology is gone, but the visual substitutes are still present, and so that degree of separation still exists. But when it comes to O Maidens, narrative or visual symbols are very few and far between. The story is more intent on presenting its dramatic elements as raw and bare as possible. As a result of this more realistic presentation, one could even argue that, aside from mildly exaggerated character traits and some bouts of comedy, O Maidens skips right past melodrama and dives right into straightforward drama. Without that layer of separation between the realistic and the melodramatic, whatever topic it tries to discuss is going to feel much more real and in your face than any symbolic representation of that topic. Which brings us to the actual topic of O Maidens. That awful three-letter word that I've been dancing around this entire time, sex. Sex in anime is a rare commodity, but what's even rarer is a deep and intricate discussion of sex. It's not just an end goal to culminate a relationship or something that older characters casually engage in on the side. Sex is the primary subject of this show, and as such, all the uglier elements of engaging with this topic are laid bare, which is something that I rarely see discussed in any form of media, but especially so in anime. As such, discussing that topic so openly and in as much detail as it does leads to some, let's call it, mental resistance within me as I try to watch it. You see, I am one of many people who was never properly educated about sex. I went to a Catholic school until I got to college, so I only ever got abstinence education and the most bare-bones information about how sex works. The pole goes in the hole, and that was the deepest extent of my knowledge until I discovered porn, which would basically be my only source of sex ed until, well, it didn't really stop being that way, actually. I barely know what I'm doing on my own end, let alone what it's like for girls, and I think that's why watching O Maidens makes me so anxious, and I bet I'm not the only one like this. Sex is one of the biggest taboos of pretty much any modern society when it comes to public conversation. even more so in popular media. You can show as much gore and violence as you want, but show too much nudity for too long, and the rating becomes drastically different. Being discreet about sex and discussion of sex has been a part of our cultural identity for a very long time, and it's backed us into a corner where actually trying to have a discussion about it is met with outright avoidance. There's a reason why media portrays the birds and the bees talk as being awkward and uncomfortable. It's been ingrained into us that talking about sex is supposed to feel this way, and Okada uses that to her advantage by writing a dramedy that's explicitly about discussing sex and how awkward sex can be to those interacting with the topic for the first time. And with an all-girl main cast, no less. Because if there's anything that makes people more uncomfortable than openly discussing sex, it's teenage girls openly discussing sex. I'll admit, I didn't really know what a period was until maybe a few years ago, because these topics are considered improper to talk about in conversation amongst a mixed gender group, even in private. And it's also why I think it's all the more important that I do watch this show. It's designed to make people like me feel uncomfortable, but it's also designed to be a good story with important ideas behind it that should be taken into consideration, as well as giving a voice to those who want these concepts to move out of the realm of the taboo. I'm not gonna pretend that it can substitute for actual sex education, that would be stupid, but being able to confront topics that make us uncomfortable is an important part of growing into a more mature individual. Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourketon Joing, Christine Seibert, Call Me Catlord, Ryan Johnson, Jennifer Spencer, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.